looking around, seeing all the wonderful people. I have great memories of Shomrei Torah Synagogue. Some of you know that my aunt and uncle, blessed memory, Ricky and Hank Goldberg, right, helped to build these congregations, and my heart is filled, and I feel their presence here. And so, for me, it's always been a very special connection, Rabbi Cameron, you know that, and to be able to engage in dialogue with you. Now, we agreed that we were going to talk about the Akedah. And by the way, probably the most written, would you agree, the most written about story of the Torah? Right? I don't know of any other story. And it's probably because the rabbis had such difficulty with it. Right? If you like something, you say, oh, it's good. Right? You don't have to respond to it. The idea of the Akedah was, it is so troubling, and has been, not just for us, not just moderns, to say like, oh, before they got it. For 2,000 years, rabbis have been writing about it and trying to understand it. Philosophers have been writing about it. And so I asked a question earlier in terms of whether you think this is even a test or not. The Torah tells us a test. Anybody want to respond? And from your perception, right? Is this a test? Now, I know there's two parts. Ofer, your wonderful president, said, of course, the second part is, did he pass the test? And that's the usual discussion. Like, they love to put Abraham on trial. Right? That's the thing, right? Let's put Abraham on trial, and is he guilty or not guilty of child abuse or listen to God? Depends what you want to charge him with. But is this a trial from your perception? Anybody want to just share where you, things that you think about? Dina, yes? You don't think so because? Yeah. Good. So you say, right, Abraham seems to be going into the saying that he's going to return, and he's going to return with his son, but is it still a test? But here's the question. Is it still a test or not? Forget about what Abraham did. You don't want to see it a test because I know you. You don't want to see God that way. I know that. So you can say, no, I can't believe God would give a test like that. I reject that idea of God. Anybody else in terms of, right? Give me a hand from anywhere, right? That you have something that in terms of whether you think it's a test or not. A couple of hands over here. Yes. So the question, it's hard to see it any other way, especially when it says, and you saw at the beginning, that God, that this is a test, if you will, but we hopefully maybe address that possibility.
Yeah, can you hear me? Is this on? Okay. So I'm going to say it is a test. I'm going to invite us to think, even though Rabbi Vogel just said it's not a test.
No, Dina did.
Okay, Rabbi Vogel disagrees with you. Is that common? Is that typical? You're welcome to come here anytime. I will never disagree with you. I agree 100% it was a test. I don't know what you're talking about. There's a philosopher, his name was Michael Rosenak, and he said something very fascinating. He gave a parable, and he suggested the way to look at the Akedah is like this. He said, imagine if you are a general in the military, and you have to get your battalion across a certain way, and in order to get the battalion across a certain way, the only way to do it is to sacrifice one of your soldiers who has to go in front of everybody else, clear the path, so that everybody will get through safely. Now, how do you choose the soldier who you very likely know will not make it back when he has to clear that path? So what do? You take the entire battalion and you draw straws. And the one that unfortunately gets the shortest straw is the one who goes forward. Well, you draw straws, and lo and behold, your son is in that battalion, and you draw his straw. And now you have a choice. You can say, oh my God, it's my son. I'm not going to send my son across the way to clear the path. Or you say, that's the way life is. I drew his straw, and I can't play favorites. And he has no choice, the general, but to sacrifice his son for the sake of the entire military. So what's the test there? What is that test, according to Rosen? And how does that test then speak to our life? Each and every one of us, potentially. It's not a rhetorical question. Ellen.
I think it's a question of devotion, and I think it's a question of paradigm. We come from the paradigm of grounding us of child sacrifice. And I think God needed to test if we were ready to move to animal sacrifice.
So what Ellen says is that it's about a paradigm shift where God wants us to move away from from human sacrifices to animal sacrifices, and therefore that's the test. I'm not sure that addresses exactly Rosenach's point, but I do agree with you, although one could argue that maybe Abraham is testing God to find out whether God is willing to move from human sacrifices to animal sacrifices, and the test is reversed.
So here's my question.
Yeah.
Question would be, if God, in the traditional understanding, knows all of our deepest thoughts, everything we're going to say, everything we're going to do, right, that in that theology, why does he have to test Abraham if he knows what he's going to do? Right? If God knows. Yes, Larry. God was testing God's self. Wow.
Did everybody hear that?
Right? God, go ahead. It's a great.
Larry said that God was testing God's self to find out how far God would go in demanding of his own children that kind of worship and that kind of faith. And so Abraham was the test for God to figure out where God was at in God's relationship to humanity.
Larry, were you saying that God's playing chicken? Is that what you just said? I just want to make sure, right? Like, was he going to go through with it or not? Abraham's got that knife. Is God going to blink or not? And God blinked. All right. Wow.
Other thought? Yes. Very much like Bruriah in the Talmud, when Rabbi Meir and Bruriah have their two children and they die. And Bruriah says to her husband, who comes back and doesn't know yet that his sons have died, she says to him, if somebody gave us a gift and then wanted that gift back, would you hold on to that gift? And Rabbi Meir says, of course I wouldn't hold on to that gift. I would give it back. And so Bruriah says to her husband, well, God has taken back his gift. It almost feels like a moment of absurdity in life, doesn't it? Like the general who has to draw the straw of his son and say, sometimes there's no justice in this world. Sometimes this world just happens, and we have to accept the demands of living life, even if those demands of living life are so very painful, and we encounter such deep loss because of it. Thank you.
All right, I think we actually have a microphone. If you want to call Rabbi Cameron, there's one in the back at the end there, Shay.
Thank you.
By the way, bells keep going all the way back. Shay Dingfelder is our communications marketing director at Temple Aliyah, your Seth, as it were. So, is that right?
Yes, Dr. Phil, it's now to you.
Okay, go ahead then.
I reject the premise. The test is
Yeah.
no recording of attempts of
So this text, this story. Oh, why don't you repeat?
So what Harry, did everybody hear what Harry said?
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Okay, so what Harry said is that Abraham had to deal with the fact, going through this test, that he never spoke to God again, that God never spoke to Abraham again, and that he had to come home to face the consequences of his actions, which is his wife who died and having to bury his wife. The absurdity, I think you said, of having to sometimes be in a position where there is no way out. That existential crisis that Sartre talks about, perhaps.
More specifically, doing what you're supposed to do at home and seeing that the result doesn't always go in your
Right. So doing what you have.
you're supposed to do and seeing that the results don't go according to the way you wanted them to go. Doing the right thing, but the result of that right thing is a very wrong thing or a very ugly thing, an ugly consequence.
I've actually talked about that in the Temple Aliyah, that actually most of the times you do the right thing, there's actually going to be bad consequences. Right? Most of the time when you do something right, it means you're righting a wrong. You've had to deal with somebody who is contrary. You're standing up for what's right, and the consequences to you are a great deal. By the way, it's a classic question, Rabbi Camus, a student comes to the teacher and says, you made a mistake. You actually, gave me too many points, right? And it gave me an A- instead of B+. And
That was never me.
Never you. And the teacher, right? Many people say, the teacher said, thank you for your honesty, right? I'm not going to take away the points. I'll give you the A, give you the A-. But the truth of the matter is, what did the child really learn from there, right? That you only tell the truth if it's going to be okay for you in the end. If it really means costing you something, then maybe you don't stand up for what's right. David Hartman of blessed memory hated this story. Right? He hated the Akedah. And it was not his defining text. His defining text was chapter 18, right? The story of Sodom and Gomorrah, where Abraham stands up to God. Right? And we're kind of surprised, aren't we? Right? Why doesn't he stand up to God? He was willing to stand up for strangers in Sodom. Okay, Lot, right? A nephew, but still, why doesn't he stand up, right, for his son? And of course, there's a Midrash, which steps in there and says that Abraham actually did argue and challenge God. Are you sure this is what you want? At least we see some sense of, if you will, kind of arguing and trying to make sure.
There are a bunch more hands. I see one in the back, Marty. Yeah, nice and loud, Marty. So Marty asked the question, where does it say anywhere that God needs permission for God to do anything God wants to do? Don't we want a just God? Don't we want a fair God? Don't we want to believe in a God who is good, who will treat God's creation in a proper way? And it seems like, Marty, from some readings of this text, that God isn't following God's own rule book. And that's a little bit frustrating, which is why Hartman couldn't stand this story.
In chapter 18, it does say that. Because I am the just and righteous judge, I need to share with Abraham about what I'm about to do. Now, it's interesting. There, he does declare. Why does God feel the need to tell him there? Now, it seems that there has to be some understanding that what God is doing is right, at least. And that makes it challenging. Yes?
Yeah, right behind Rabbi Schaefer, the
So
gentleman
Jeff.
behind you,
Jeff.
and then we'll get to you.
There's just another way to look at it. Maybe God sees Abraham as possessing not only the genetics, but the spiritual seed. And he's not only testing Abraham, but he's testing the Jewish people for generation.
Wow, so what Jeff says is that God sees in Abraham something far more profound than just a single individual, that resting in that individual are the seeds of an entire nation afterwards. And so what God wants to know is not so much whether Abraham will do right and wrong, but whether Abraham is the just representation of all of us who come after him. And so then that leads me to think, Jeff, then what is our test? What is the challenge that God presents through Abraham that's actually to each one of us in the 21st century? What's our Akedah, I think is what you're asking us to consider. What is our Akedah? What's the test? that God puts to you in this moment that creates such a difficult decision for you? Is there an Akedah? Do you feel, have you felt in moments in your life that God is testing you the way that Jeff is suggesting God is testing us?
Does it have to be God, or can it just be like life is testing me?
Certainly, it could be life. Thank you, Jeff. That's, I think, profound.
That I never heard before today is the fact that God never spoke to Abraham again. And I'm wondering if that's true or if Abraham will listen again. I think maybe the test is which voice. Because listening to God got them into a situation which was a temple. And then hearing the angels say that Abraham, that was
Right. So,
maybe our challenge.
what are the multiple voices that we can hear in life? And the text bears it out. By the way, if you didn't know, the idea that Abraham and Isaac didn't speak later is just from the text, Midrashic understanding, the fact that we just don't have any more dialogue between them. Right? We don't know, but the Torah doesn't describe that. Just as, right, did Sarah know or not that Isaac was being taken? There's a whole, like all the Midrash in which she heard that she passed, that she died from that. But if you don't know, if you look at the reading, Abraham actually says hineni, 3 times in this story. It's unparalleled anywhere in terms of the Torah itself. 3 times. One of the 3 times is actually the 3 different voices. Donna, it's really amazing. The first one, God calls to him, right, at the beginning of the story. Says hineni, right? He's ready to go. On the journey, his son, Isaac, just says one beautiful word, like, oh, it's so heartbreaking. He says, Avi, my father. It's nothing else. And Abraham responds, hineni, here I am. And then as he's about to sacrifice, it's Malach Adonai, an angel of God, who now calls to him an angel, and Abraham says, hineni. 3 different, how do you say I'm here when you hear 3 different voices? Which one do you give obligation to? Which one do you listen to? And I think we all, Rabbi Cameron, as you were suggesting, we hear all those voices all the time. We hear the voices of family. We hear the voices of community. We hear the voices of a job. We hear the voices of the right. We hear the voices of the left. Hello. Right?
Well, actually, I don't think we hear the voices on the sides opposite of us because we don't listen anymore.
No.
But that's a whole other discussion. What Rabbi Vogel just said made me think, and your question, I think, provides us the opportunity to think about the way we hear voices. Maimonides suggests that the first time that Abraham hears God to sacrifice his son, to take his son, it's a lower level of prophecy. Maimonides says it's the 7th level of prophecy. That first hineni where he hears, but he doesn't hear completely. He doesn't hear fully. He doesn't understand the depth of what's asked of him. But when, as you said at the very end, that last hineni that Abraham offers, in response to the angel, that's for Rambam, for Maimonides, the 11th level of prophecy. That's the kind of hearing that is the hearing when you look at the face. This is not Rambam, this is now additional commentary. When you look at the face of the one who's calling to you. And the angel's call made Abraham step back and look at Isaac's face and say, wait a minute, am I willing to sacrifice that which is dearest to me for a voice that I thought I heard clearly? Maybe I didn't hear that voice as clearly as I needed to hear it. And maybe it's only in seeing the face of another human being, any human being for that matter, that's looking at me when I'm about to do whatever it is that I'm about to do, that says, I need to hear a little bit more carefully and respond with a deeper hineni to whatever that cry silent or not, of that face in front of me is. Whether that's the face of my child, the face of a spouse, the face of a parent, the face of a congregant.
And, you know, Malach Adonai, yesterday in the story of Hagar, right, opens her eyes. Right? That's the voice that comes and speaks to her, and she opens her eyes and then sees the well that apparently was there all the time, and she couldn't hear it. You know, there's a great possibility here as well, that God is testing Abraham in his classic way of whether he can see, if Abraham can actually see who his son is. And that is Isaac. It made me think. Isaac is supposed to be a very quiet, weak individual. Right? He was, right, the one who really didn't act out. He was the one that gets lost between all the other great patriarchs. And so this suggestion says that Abraham didn't see Isaac actually as a potential as an heir. And that he was okay with sacrificing him because he had Ishmael. He had someone who he thought actually could be better. Almost like Jacob, Esau's story, like who is better? And so Abraham is up there ready to sacrifice him, doesn't see the son for his potential. And then, because the question is, why does the angel have to say Abraham twice? Right? Shouldn't it be once, right? Abraham, oh, excuse me, what am I doing? I'm sorry. But he has to call out twice. Why? One answer is, if you look in the Torah, it's actually, there's a psak in the cantilever. There's a hard stop. And that after the first time, he actually saw his son differently. He was actually able to finally, what you said, remind me, he's actually able to see what his son was really about and the potential. And that was part of the test of, you have faith in your children, and can you really see them for who they are?
That reminds me of the tendency of parents to want for their children something that their children may not want for themselves. And the willingness of parents to push children in a certain way. Like, I know my son's going to be a rabbi. He just came into services late, so there I already know he's not going to be a rabbi because we have to be here on time. That we get lost in our own, as Rabbi Vogel just made me think, we get lost in what we want for another person, and we push that so hard without ever stepping back and saying, as you just said, but what do they want? What's best for them? Not what's best for us. And are we willing to sacrifice them for the sake of what we want for them, which causes enormous, enormous pain and suffering? Well, I mean, we're out of time, unfortunately, if we want to stay to our schedule for the rest of the service.
It's your house. I'm not.
We'll take one or two more comments. How's that? One or two more comments. We'll take one in the front and then one all the way in the back. And then we will wrap up, conclude services, and then have really 4 wonderful, wonderful opportunities. While we're sitting here, let me take a minute and explain those opportunities. As soon as we sound the shofar and put away the Sifrei Torah, for those who want the beautiful, beautiful music and service of Chazans, Stein, and Hasselkorn, you're going to stay here. For those of you who love the piyutim of the Machzor and want a far more traditional davening experience, you're going to go into the chapel 2 rooms over. For those who want to engage in a very different kind of Bible dialogue called bibliodrama, you're going to go with Rabbi Vogel into the social hall behind the sanctuary. And for those of you who would like to do a little bit of meditation on the inner light within, I'm going to do a little bit of teaching of text on the Ner Tamid, the inner light within, and then do a meditation. And then Rabbi Vogel and the meditation group are going to come back here at the end of services for the final sounding of the shofar. The traditional service will go until they finish the piyutim of their service. And so that's going to happen as soon as we put the Torahs away, and you are welcome. By the way, I didn't tell you where my session is. It's going to be in the school building. We normally do it outside, but I think it's a little warm out there. So we're going to go into room 8, which is just up the stairs and to the right, before you get all the way up the stairs. That's where I'm going to be. So the traditional service next door, the musical Musaf service here, Rabbi Vogel in the social hall, and me in room 8 in the school building. So we'll take the last 2 comments. Yes. Wow, what a beautiful, what's your name? Paulette. Paulette says that it's hard in the moment to be able to understand the experiences that we're going through until we get to the aftermath of those experiences. Do we have the patience and the resolute ability to get through those uncomfortable moments where we cannot imagine why we have to go through them, but that if we can stick with it, stick with that discomfort, the rewards, which we cannot see today, will be clear to us in some future moment. And that's really what this story is all about. And so the test is the test of endurance. The test is the test of the ability to withstand discomfort in the moment for some future, hopefully understood, clear reward. Thank you, Paula. All the way in the back, yes.
I mean, my question would be, I don't think it's a test of God to Abraham, but just the opposite. If God knows everything and what's going to happen, he didn't have to test. But I think Abraham was testing God to see how just God is and knows how just is he to know if I should follow. And we don't know that he really, yes, he held the knife, he was about to, but would he have really? And we'll never know. Hindsight is 20/20.
So the test is for Abraham, test is for God. Will they come through with it? By the way, no one asked if it's a test of Isaac at all. It's interesting. How old was Isaac? Isaac's about 37 years old. Now, you want to think of him in the story as being like a young kid who had nothing to say about it. But Isaac, is he a victim, or is he actually, right, a character in the story that really actually is willing to give himself as well, and not just from anybody else? There's so many questions, which is the great thing about this story, is it's going to give us many more questions than we are going to have answers. And the only issue is, will we be able to hear the story and struggle with it in life and able to hear the right voices and do the right thing? The call of the shofar is, I think, beckoning us.